Good morning, everyone. Pastor Susana asked the UMM to lead one of the services, and we were trying to find a pastor to do the sermon, but we could not find any. And I asked Brother Chris to do the sermon, but he told me to do it myself. But it's always convenient just to pass the responsibility to others. It's a big responsibility to speak for God. I'm not an eloquent speaker. I didn't go to the seminary, and I'm not a pastor. Just thinking of a verse and a topic is hard. So I decided just to preach on my favorite verse in the Bible. This is the verse that gave me comfort when I was going through the most difficult times of my life. This is the verse that made my faith in the sovereign God become firmer and stronger. Many of you probably know this by heart. The verse is Romans 8:28. It says, "And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God and to them who are called according to His purpose." Today, I would like to speak to you on a subject I entitled, "When God Allows Things to Happen." I would like to start my message with a question. The question is, are there accidents with God? And I'm referring specifically to the believers, to the Christians, to the people of God. Because according to this verse, all things work together for good to them that love God. So there's a qualifying statement there. It doesn't include the unbelievers. So, to be more specific, the question is, are there accidental things that happen to a child of God? The answer to that, of course, is no. There are no accidents with God. So nothing happens to us without God's knowledge. Nothing happens to us without God's permission. And nothing happens to us unless God allows it. But there are things that happen to our lives that we do not understand. Things happen in our lives that we may not like. Things that make our life difficult. Sometimes it becomes confusing, disturbing, and beyond belief. We get confused. Why? Because we do not understand. We get disturbed. Why? Because we don't know why it's happening. And beyond belief, because we don't expect it to happen to us. The only thing that we can do as believers is to believe that all things work together for good. It's hard to accept that when you are going through a very difficult situation. How can you say that all things work together for good when we're experiencing bad things? Like my cousin, for example, her name is Marites, and her husband got infected with COVID and he died. The thing is, she was left with 4 kids to take care of. She's just an ordinary housewife. She have not worked for years. It's very hard to find a job in the Philippines if you are old. Companies prepare the young graduates, and there's a lot of unemployed young graduates in the Philippines. So there's so much competition. And not only that, she was left with 1 million pesos in hospital bills. We made a contribution just to be able to help her pay that bill. Now she's a faithful Christian, but bad thing happened to her. I could not even quote this verse to her because it may sound like an insult. We don't know the future. We don't know if all things will work together for good for her in the future. As of now, her future is very bleak. I remember my pastor in the Philippines. He got a 15-year-old son. His son, out of his old age, reminds me of Isaac. But his son died in a motorcycle accident. How did he die? He died while he is serving God. He was driving a motorcycle to be able to get a jeep so they will be able to pick up the children and take them to Sunday school. Then all of a sudden, a jeepney hit his motorcycle and he died on the spot. He died while his father was preaching on a Sunday service. And when that happened, my pastor embraced his son and he said, "Why you? Why not me?" And he was never the same after that. Have you experienced that? I tell you, if this thing happened to you, you are going to hate life. And you've probably heard some story or seen some stories like that when bad things happen to good people. You know, a lot of people have this mentality. They believe in the law of cause and effect. That is, if you do good things will happen to you. If you do bad things will happen to you. But you know, if you live long enough on this earth, you know that that's not always the case. When these things happens to us, we are quick to ask the question, why? Why, Lord, did you allow this thing to happen? And I have to admit that sometimes my faith would waver too. One time, I was talking to Joe when my wife was in the hospital. He told me that the church was praying for my wife. I told him, the church was praying for my wife. I was praying hard for my wife. Her relatives in the Philippines was praying hard for her. But I told Joe, but nobody is listening. And he was shocked. And he said, "Marvin, you are not supposed to be talking like that. You are one of the leaders of the church." But I was so frustrated. I was praying even when I was at work. I was so distressed that I would close the door of my office and kneel down and beg God to spare my wife. But instead of getting healed, my worst nightmare came true. Her heart stopped for an hour during the operation, and that resulted to a brain damage. She can no longer talk. She can no longer control half of her body. And what's hard about that is I would see the agony in her face, and I could not even ask her what's bothering her because she cannot talk. And it breaks my heart just to see the look on her face. It's killing me. It's like my heart was being torn piece by piece. And I was in this kind of situation when Joe talked to me. That's why I said what I said. It was so frustrating. When her sister came to visit her from the Philippines, and when she saw her condition, she cried. And she asked the question, why did this thing happen to you? You have never taken advantage of anyone. And you were very generous to your relatives in the Philippines. And she could not understand why it happened to her. The question is always why. We struggle with that question when we go to a very difficult situation. Remember Job? What broke Job's patience is not the suffering. What broke his patience is not knowing why he suffered. And you know what he said? Out of his frustration. It's one of the things he said in Job 9:23. When a good person dies a sudden death, God sits back and laughs. Can you imagine that? He was talking about God. What Job could not understand is why he is suffering so much when he had done nothing to deserve such a punishment. And when God finally spoke, he did not offer Job an answer. Instead, he drove home the point that it is better to know God than to know the answer. And that's what I learned. Knowing God is better than knowing the answer. I have to realize that. I have to. Because when I feel the pain, I always ask God, why? Instead of telling God, Lord, I want to know you more. Because you will not do this thing in my life unless you have a valid reason, unless there is a purpose. You know one thing about God, and this also what I learned. God is not uncaring. He cares for us. That is why Peter said, cast all your cares upon him. For what reason? Because he cares for you. God cares for us. God is near to the brokenhearted, and he knows how to comfort us. And I'm speaking by experience. And another thing I found out is that pain is not always a punishment. It is only meant to purify us. And Job said that after God spoke to him. In Job 23:10, he said, and this is one of my favorite verse also. He said, "But he knows the way that I take. When he has tried me, I shall come out as gold." You know, sometimes you cannot even find comfort from your friends. But you know what? I find comfort in knowing that God knows the way I'm going through, that He is aware of what's happening to me. I find comfort in that. We can be comforted by the fact that God is sovereign. He is in control of everything that happens in our life. And God taught me that He was sovereign early on my Christian life. You know how God showed me that He's sovereign? At times He would show me a magic trick. I know that's not the right word, but that's just an expression that I used to describe it. Remember Peter? One time? Actually, I'll just read the verse. Matthew 17:27. Matthew 17:27. "However, we don't want to offend them, so go down to the lake and throw in a line. Open the mouth of the fish you catch, and you will find a large silver coin. Take it and pay the tax for both of us." When I first saw this, what in the world is that about? You could just ask Judas. Judas is their treasurer, to get some money from Judas and pay their taxes. But Jesus, He performs a magic trick. So, if you think about this, what is that about? Well, Jesus is teaching Peter that God is sovereign, that He is in control even of the fish. He's not only in control of the fish, but He's in control of the person who dropped that coin in the water. He is in control even of time. So when Peter reached the lake, by the time he threw the line in the water, the fish at the exact time was swimming in that spot and took the bait. And one time it happened to me too. 3 times actually. It happened to me 3 times, but I have no time to tell you all the details, but I'll tell you one. When I was a new Christian, our pastor was teaching us how to win soul, and he gave us a pamphlet about 20 pages of all the verses that we need to memorize, that we can use to win souls. And the thing is, when you witness to a person, you have to have a Bible. But the thing is, when we go to places, we're not always carrying a Bible. And it happened like 30 years ago. Nowadays, you can just pull up a Bible app in your cell phone. But 30 years ago, there's no cell phone, there's no internet. So you have to have a real Bible. And I was thinking, I wish the Bible is just gonna be so small that I can fit it in my pocket. So when I have an opportunity to talk to a person and witness to a person, I will just be able to pull up the Bible from my pocket. But I didn't know I was thinking so loud that God heard what I was thinking. And then one time, our pastor ask us, who among you have memorized the pamphlet I gave you? If somebody can recite to me all those verses, I'm gonna have a very special reward for you. And I was looking around and nobody was raising their hand. I guess nobody memorized the verses. But I did. So I raised my hand. I went to the front. I went to the pulpit and quote one by one all the verses in that pamphlet from cover to cover. I didn't know how I did it. Probably with the help of the Holy Spirit, I was able to quote all these verses. And then the pastor pulled out a small box from underneath the pulpit. I didn't know what it was, and he gave it to me. And when I opened it, I was stunned. It was the very thing that I wished for. It was the smallest Bible ever made. You cannot find it anywhere in the Philippines. It was only available in Hong Kong and in some other place, but not in the Philippines. But our pastor was invited to a conference in Hong Kong. And when he saw that, he decided to buy it. So when I thought about it, and I could not understand, how did the pastor know what I was thinking? Of course, he does not know what I was thinking, but God knows. So that's when I realized that God is not only can read my mind, but he can control the mind of my pastor to get that Bible. And not only that, God was in control of the minds of the organizer that they conducted it in Hong Kong, where that Bible is available. It's just so overwhelming for me how God did all that for me. It's just so amazing for me. And that's how God taught me that he is sovereign. He's sovereign. He is in control of everything. And I remember that verse in the Bible that is in Isaiah 65:24. It says, even before they call, I will answer. And while they are still speaking, I will hear. That's our God. He can read our mind and give it to us even before we ask for it. In Psalm 37:4, it said, delight yourself in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. What does that mean? Well, God will be in direct communication with your heart that you don't have to speak. He'll give you the desires of your heart. You don't even have to say it. If you obey him, if you walk with him, if you delight yourself in him and get to know him better, I'm telling you, he will give you the desires of your heart, even if you don't ask. And you know the story of Joseph, right? He understood later on in his life that God is sovereign. When he met with his brothers, he had become so powerful that his brothers were so scared of him. But with great faith, Joseph tried to calm their fears by saying in Genesis 50:20, but as for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. Joseph realized that God was behind all that God was in control. And It's hard to understand, right? Because we're talking about people who are making evil plots, and God was in control of that also. Yes, He was. And take note what Joseph said. God allowed those things to happen so He will be able to save much people alive. So that's the purpose. And that's one thing we should realize. You know, God will put us in a position or situation so we can help others. So God can help us save lives. Because God loves other people too, not just us. So God makes things work together for good, for a purpose. So you have to know what the purpose is. And that is usually to save lives. You know, God blesses us for a reason. Not to hoard the blessing to ourselves, but to help save others and to help those who are in need. So we Christians should really believe Romans 8:28. So let's not try to know the answers to the question why, but try to know who your God is. And those of us who are going through difficult situations, may you find comfort in this verse. God bless all of you.